You know, there is a profound disappointment among the American people because we keep winning elections and then we keep getting leaders who don't do anything they promised. The American people were told, if only we have a Republican majority in the House, things will be different. Well, in 2010, the American people showed up in enormous numbers and we got a Republican majority in the House. And very little changed. Then the American people were told, you know, the problem is the Senate. If only we get a Republican majority in the Senate and retire Harry Reid as majority leader, then things will be different. Well, in 2014, the American people rose up in enormous numbers, voted to do exactly that. We've had a Republican majority in both houses of Congress now for about 6 months. What has that majority done? What has that majority done? First thing we did in December is we came back and passed a $1 trillion Cromnibus plan filled with pork and corporate welfare, but it listens to one and only one voice. That is the voice of the Washington cartel, of the lobbyists on K Street, of the big money and big corporations. You know, if you go to the American people and ask, is reauthorizing the XM Bank a priority for you? The standard response for most of them will be, the what? They don't even know what this is. Let me tell you what it is. It is an egregious example of corporate welfare. It is the American taxpayers being on the dime for hundreds of billions of dollars in loan guarantees given out to a handful of giant corporations. Republicans also are listening to K Street and the lobbyists. Why? It's not complicated. The giant corporations that are getting special favors from the taxpayers hire an army of lobbyists that write campaign checks after campaign checks and write campaign checks after campaign checks that write campaign checks after campaign checks and You know who doesn't have lobbyists? A single mom waiting tables. You know who doesn't have lobbyists? A teenage immigrant like my father was, washing dishes, making 50 cents an hour, struggling to achieve the American dream. You know who doesn't have lobbyists? A factory worker who just wants to work and provide for his or her children. They don't have lobbyists, and so what happens? Career politicians in both parties gang up with giant corporations to loot their taxes to make it harder for people who are struggling to achieve the American dream. Harder for people who are struggling to achieve the American dream. To take from their paychecks to fund giant corporations. It is wrong and it is corrupt. With the exception of Bernie Sanders, I'll give credit to Senator Sanders for standing up against corporate welfare. I'll give credit to Senator Sanders for standing up against corporate welfare. For standing up against corporate welfare. Credit to Senator Sanders.
We now have
for standing up against corporate wealth.
Where billionaires are literally able to buy elections and candidates. Let's not kid ourselves.
They want to end Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, more tax breaks for the rich and large corporations. Nobody in America wants that except the billionaire class. And yet they are now able to put hundreds of millions of dollars into the political process.
A great nation will not survive, in my view, when so few have so much and so many have so little.
He has a set of consistent principles that he has run on his entire political life.
Obviously, we have to be strong in protecting our people from terrorism, but I don't think we have to undermine the Constitution and deny our people basic constitutional rights. I think what we have got to appreciate is when you have 6 financial institutions that have assets equivalent to about 60% of the GDP of America, you know what? Let's be honest. You can't regulate them.
You'd break up the banks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They are if they're too big to fail, they are too big to exist. Middle class is collapsing, poverty is up, and the rich are doing phenomenally well. What do? What you do is say that in America we're going to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, and by doing that we're going to create millions of jobs. We've got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, and over a period of years to at least $15 an hour.
We as a nation are the only country in the industrialized world not to guarantee health care. 45,000 people die each year because they don't get to a doctor on time, which is why, by the way, I am a strong advocate of a Medicare for all single-payer program.
Quality education in America, from child care to higher education, must be affordable for all.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders surprised everybody by raising more than $1.5 million in the first 24 hours after he announced. You have 100,000 people who have pledged to volunteer on the campaign already?
No, actually we have 175,000. All over this country, you have a lot of bright, decent, good people. They're saying, you know what? The situation is hopeless. You can't beat the Koch brothers. You can't beat the billionaires. You can't win. I'm giving up. That is exactly what they want us to believe. And I beg of you, do not enter that world of despair. We can win this fight if we stand together.
Well, let me just say this about my political career. I think few would argue that it is the most unusual political career in the United States Senate. Nobody thought that I would be elected mayor of Burlington, Vermont. Very few people thought that I would beat an incumbent Republican to become United States Congressman from Vermont by 16 points. And people weren't so sure I could beat the richest person in Vermont to become a United States Senator. So I would say, don't underestimate me. When millions of people stand up and fight, they win.